Okay, welcome everybody. John Shutsky here, instructor and professor in biological systems engineering. And I have with me today Greg Marconnet, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. I'm a big believer in the value of learning from other people, their wisdom, their stories. And I think Greg has a lot to share with us today in terms of his experiences working in the private sector, particularly, but also doing quite a bit of work here at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, actually pretty intensely for the last several years. I'm not going to spoil all of Greg's introduction, but I will say that I'm really grateful, Greg, for your involvement with our senior design BSE 508 and 509. When I came back to the faculty in 2016, the first time I taught 508, Greg was one of our advisors and had a really fun project working with a group of students who were working on, I believe it was a freezer retrofit for Babcock Hall ice cream. So got to work on some ice cream issues. And then the year after that, in 2018, Greg worked with a team that was working on beer. So beer and ice cream. Greg is also, I think you'll probably talk about this a little bit, has been very involved in the consulting work related to one of our big buildings here on campus that's brand new. And again, may talk about that a little bit as he moves along. In Greg's work, then when he's not working with students, his day job, I guess I'll say it, is he works as the vice president in food and beverage for Mead and Hunt, an engineering consulting firm. And they have offices here in Madison as well as 30 other locations, I believe, around the world, right?
Yes, well, around the United States, not around the world.
Around the US. So Greg has been involved, like I said, not only in 508, but also BSE 308. Welcome back, Greg. And if you could just maybe talk, just to get things kicked off, talk a little bit about yourself further, and then also maybe your role with those BSE students in 508.
Sure. Yeah, I went to school at Milwaukee School of Engineering in Milwaukee and graduated as a mechanical engineer. From there, I went on to work at Oscar Mayer right out of school. Spent a couple years in the Oscar Mayer Chicago plant doing engineering and engineering development things. But most of my time was spent in the Oscar Mayer Chicago plant, where I was a project engineer, chief power plant engineer, and an engineering project manager. Learned a lot at that field experience. Just being in the field, understanding how things really work and sometimes don't really work was really important to my career development. It really helped me get ready to go onto a corporate career, and I spent about the next 20 years in corporate career helping plants improve themselves through either engineering design, sanitary design, quality, sanitation, and at the end, procurement for a little while. So I got all over the company, got to see a lot of different things as far as functions, but I also got to work around the world, working for Kraft Foods as they bought Oscar Mayer early on in my career, and got to work in Australia and Germany and China and all around the world.
Yeah, and I think we'll come back and talk a little bit more about your work with Kraft and then go beyond that. How about a little bit on your work with these 508 students who are part of our department here?
Well, 508 for me is just really an important class. It is that capstone class where you, one, get to apply all the things that you've learned over the last 4 years, all those formulas and equations. But maybe more importantly to me, it's your first chance to really kind of do an engineering job, maybe, to really understand what it's like to be an engineer and the things that you need to follow up on and what you have to think about. Now, my role as a 508 advisor is to kind of make sure you don't go off the rails, something you won't necessarily get in your first job, and think about the things that are important and ask a lot of questions along the way. My job isn't to help you do the project, but rather just keep you on the rails and make sure that you're thinking about what's important as you apply all these formulas and equations that you've learned.
So we don't currently have any fun ice cream or beer projects, but maybe we'll get you some back sometime in the
Yeah,
future.
look forward to it one day.
And my understanding is that you're not the only Marconnet that's been involved with engineering and also with design projects and things like that. You have some family members as well?
I do. My family, I have two boys and a girl, all turn out being mechanical engineers. So as they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. My oldest son, Andrew, He designs X-ray tubes for General Electric, and so if you're in an X-ray machine, good likelihood he's worked on an X-ray tube that supports that. And there's a lot of mechanical engineering there, as well as heat transfer.
Mhm.
Alex, my youngest son, he led engineering for a company called Muncie Industries up until about a year ago. They make wire rope fittings, so cranes and bridges, all that wire rope. He's the one that helped design those things. In the fall, he switched over to doing some teaching, and now teaches statics and CAD at a small college that feeds Penn State called Penn College.
Okay.
And then finally, my daughter, the one that you mentioned initially, she is a professor at Purdue, and sometimes she gets the joy of doing their um, uh, 508, 509 class. I don't know what the number is, but this engineering senior project, and she finds it one, it's kind of challenging as a professor to do, just because of what I said at the start. You're trying to let the kids do all the work and think things through, keep them on the rails, but not do the project for them. So
It's interesting to me, one of the first students I ever had in a senior design project was from Minnesota. I actually brought her, she graduated in 98. Her name is Mary Pat. I actually brought her back, and about 2 weeks ago, I recorded one of these sessions. She's gone on to manage entire John Deere factories and facilities in Georgia, and she currently is the plant manager and engineer for the John Deere Davenport Works, which is all of their forestry and construction equipment. So for those of you, whether you're in 308 or 508 or some other engineering course or even program, do take this stuff seriously, because if you become a good engineer and you learn that process and you learn the life lessons that people like Greg can teach, it can be really just life-changing in terms of your career. So you've talked about a little bit about the ice cream and beer projects and the sort of big picture with BSE 508. You want to talk a little bit about your work at Hunt and Mead? What do you guys do? And what exactly does a VP for food and beverage, like what do you do on a daily basis?
okay. Well, just a little bit about Mead and Hunt. There's about 900 employees at Mead and Hunt. We started in 1900 with Dr. Mead, who was a UW professor. He was most concerned about water going across the face of the earth, and so he started his engineering firm doing that. But since, as I'll show you, it's grown into 6 different business units. So we have 30 offices around the country, as was mentioned before, and about 137 million in sales in 2018. Keeps growing every year. Here's the 6 business units that I talked to you about. So we're a pretty simple and flat organization. Each business unit works independently. Mine is the food and beverage business unit, but I will tell you that I leverage 5 of the other business units for help when I need it. So if I need extra help for structural engineering, I might go to architectural and building engineering. Transportation often does the roadways around the buildings that we design. And then environmental is always important to every food plant. So that's a little bit about Mead and Hunt and what we are. So just an architectural engineering firm with a pretty broad base of different areas that we work in.
Yeah, and Greg, I've shortchanged a little bit the work that you did on the big building on campus, which I think has recently, I don't know if it's like a hard opening for the public, but it's open and more or less functional now. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that building and what some of your roles were with that?
Sure. So I got involved in the Meat and Muscle. It was called the Meat and Muscle Lab. It's a new building on campus across from Deschaux Hall. And it's a place where I had the opportunity, as I finished my career with Kraft Foods, to help them design this new meat plant of the future. And it was really, the idea was that it would be a state-of-the-art plant. And I worked through all the functional design criteria. So if you will, I developed a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of functional information so that the architects and the engineers could actually design the plant. I specified room temperatures and humidities and lighting things, all the things that are important in each room to make sure that we got what we needed to have, as well as review details and help design the plan. So that was my job, and I got them to the point where they're moving along very well. And then we built the plant here over the last couple of years. And you're right, it did open this fall, and as you said, it's maybe not open to the public yet, but it is open, and they have done some work in that and made products, so
Yeah. Yeah.
available to
So
everybody.
when the students are all back on campus, encourage you to stop by. Hopefully it will be open. It's actually the building, yeah, across from DeJoe Paul, right on Observatory. Um, I was noting as you were talking, and I've just some of the research work I've done. Mead and Hunt was named as a best place to work. I think it was number 6 at the time of the slide, and also a top 25 hot firm. Could you
Mhm.
what does that mean? I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple things. Zweig, the group that does this does these surveys, is an industry group for the architectural engineering companies industry, and they do some surveys, and they look at, maybe how much your revenue has grown. They look at different things about your company, and they rank those against other companies. And so our company has done very well in those surveys. They do go out and they survey a lot of the employees, and so I participated in the survey, as well as many around our company. And it's with the feedback that they get and the information that they kind of rank you where you're at in the standing of all the companies that they look at. And so we're very proud of that. It means a lot to us. Daniel Mead, I mentioned to you, UW professor. He is strong on ethics, but he also really wanted this great place for people to work. And it shows up in some of the papers that he wrote early on, and the things that he said about what his future vision for the company is. And that's really been a guiding light for us, is to kind of keep our company more family-like as best we can. It gets harder as you get to 900 people, right? Back when Daniel Mead, he probably knew everybody in the company, was CEO. The CEO today, he knows a lot of the people, but not all 900, unfortunately. Some other good news for us is, in the last year or two, we've grown from not being ranked in food and beverage to being number 10 in the country. And so we're making good moves there, and we're really, really excited and pleased with that work. It takes a lot to be one of the top 10 food and beverage engineering firms. A lot of good competition out there, but we've slowly been clawing our way along on that. And it is driven by the values that we have, and a lot of the things that you see here on the far right. So.
Mhm. Just quickly, I think that, with being active in several of these spaces that our students are, including food and beverage, or in our case also food and bioprocessing, the whole environmental area, a potential opportunity here in the future. But you do have to work hard to be successful at a company like Mead and Hunt. You've got to have good experience. So let's just kind of transition to talking back to your time as a student. Maybe we'll eventually talk about some of the lessons learned and some of those kinds of things. You mentioned UW School of Milwaukee. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how you decided to
Sure.
get into engineering and some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. From very young, I always thought I wanted to be an engineer. I liked planning and thinking things out. But as I started at UW Milwaukee, I wanted to be a structural engineer. And I found out it was like really hard, and I actually wasn't doing so good. I didn't get on the right dean's list, the one that for the great students. I got on the other dean's list. Um, and at that point in time, somebody that I would have never thought would come and talk to me, but it was my father's boss, a guy by the name of Robert Owen. He graduated from UW-Madison as an electrical engineer. And he says, Greg, we need to have lunch together. And we had lunch, and he talked about engineering and how hard it was, but also that he had confidence that I could do this and that I just needed to get a new start.
Mhm.
He suggested that I go to MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering, and actually gave me a little scholarship to really encourage me. And it really worked out well for me, because that was the right setting for me to do well. And I did much, much better and got on the other dean's list, the one that you all want to be on, of course. And so it was quite a troubled start, if you will. It didn't work out kind of the way you think it should. So I started out by just basically kind of getting kicked out of one school, finding another, but then doing very well. So tough times, but you just got to think about everything that you learn along the way. And that was one of the learnings I had, is I just need to do my best each and every time I do something.
Yeah, and Greg, I don't want to hit our students too hard over the head with this, but there are students in our program who get to their junior, senior year, and they've they've maybe struggled, particularly those first couple years, and then they end up finding the right home. And maybe even as they get into their junior and senior years, they face some challenges, whether it's grades or family issues, or in some cases it's financial. So I think the life lessons that you've learned really well is that you just never give up and you keep striving. And um,
Absolutely.
this Mr. Owen sounds like kind of a special guy. Well, what I'm curious, like what did he see in you? Like what was there that really he obviously took you to heart and
Mhm.
gave you some opportunities. What was it about you, do you think, that he saw?
Well, I just think that as he looked at my father was an insurance salesman, and Mr. Owen was an insurance salesman. But as he talked to my father and he heard a lot about me, he knew that I could do things, that I could design things. I had the right mindset to be an engineer, but I needed some encouragement. And to be honest, where I really had the toughest time was some of the higher level maths and things like that got me in trouble. And so he said, hey, you just got to take it one step at a time and just keep plugging away at it. And he says school isn't always easy, and he knew from his days at UW-Madison it wasn't always easy, but it was all about just keep on trying, and eventually you'll get there.
Yeah, there will be these people that all of our students will encounter in their life. You could call them a mentor, you could call them somebody who just sort of pops into your life at the right time and right place. And it is really important that you sort of listen when those things happen, and you pursue those opportunities. And I
Mhm.
think the other thing is when people see that potential in you and they decide to make an investment, it's often not money, right? It might be advice or time, but you really do need to find ways to take advantage of that and, prove it to yourself, but also, make them proud with what you do in the future. And I'm sure, is Mr. Owen still around?
No, he passed away about 5 years ago, but certainly somebody that will certainly miss
Yeah.
for the rest of my life here.
I had people like that in my career too, who really, really made a difference. And, I'll always be grateful for that, including my parents. Um, just let's talk a little bit. I think you and I both were in school in the 1980s, and here we are in, 2020 and beyond. 2021 is going to be right around the corner. What are some things that are quite different now than when we were in school that you want to speak to?
Well, sure. First of all, we didn't have computers. We did have calculators. The HP 35C, if I remember right, is what I had. So that for one was very important. The second thing is we didn't have the internet. If you wanted to know something, you went back over to the library and you got some books out, and some of them were often dated. Not that engineering principles change over time, but a lot of the breakthroughs change over time. And so couple of those things that you couldn't just work from your desk or wherever. You needed to go out and find the information. Now you have at your fingertips a real opportunity. And my thought is it really helps the students today do a better job at learning about engineering, because they don't have to go across campus to go to the library to find this book in the corner to get some information. They can get on the internet, so then they can focus on absorbing that information and then applying it to the work that they do. So I think education has really gotten to a higher level with some of these advances in technology that we can really apply.
I don't think students realize, particularly when they're in the design class. I remember as a PhD student, there was I was working on a design as part of my research, and I needed a wiring standard that had been published by SAE. At that time, they were called the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's pretty simple, it's like a 12-page standard. And I remember waiting for like weeks to get that. And now, while you might still have to pay for it, or the library might need to pay for it,
Mhm.
typically I can have that standard in hand within a matter of minutes, or at the most hours. So things really have changed. But it's also a huge challenge to keep track of all of that information as well.
Yeah,
What are
certainly.
some of the challenges when you have, and this is not just about us going to school in the 1980s. I think there's always been this generational thing when new students come into the engineering workplace. I remember being in my 20s, my first real job. And, I was working with guys that were, at that time, they seemed really old. They were in their 40s and 50s. But what are some of the challenges you see when you're working with new, younger engineers that are like right out of school?
Well, what I'll tell you is what folks like myself have to do is we need to be willing to stand back and listen. Too often we want to just kind of tell the young folks what we think they need to do. Sometimes we need to listen and see if they don't hear or tell us things that change the whole way that we think about it. But on the other hand, I think that it's also important that the students listen to some of these experienced folks. I will tell you that I had a project early on in the Oscar Mayer Chicago plant where an old 40-year-old or 40 years of experience guy told me a project would never work. And I says, you know what? I've done the math on this. I've done a small pilot scale test. It's going to work. $1 million later, we're pulling it out. But to his credit, he never told me, I told you so. He just said, hey, next time let's work more closely together on this, and I think we can have a great project. And so I think the listening needs to go both ways. And so you just need to figure out how to listen and absorb and see how you might apply that as you go forward. But also hopefully your managers will be willing to listen to you and hear that, hey, maybe there's some new things that you've heard about in school or elsewhere that can really improve their business.
It's interesting that that happened to you. And I mean, you could call it a failure or a life lesson or a learning lesson. The fact that he didn't, get down on you, uh, despite that having happened, do you find that there are young people who are like afraid? They're afraid to fail and therefore they end up not taking risks or kind of like maybe being as innovative as they could be?
I do think so. I think that in some cases, a lot of times, going through school and going through their early life, a lot of times things are pretty safe, right? You play a video game, and if it doesn't work out, you just go back to the start and try it again, right? And this stuff ends up being real. I mean, we design ammonia refrigeration plants. If we design them improperly and there's a problem, we could actually kill people with an ammonia spill, right? And so there's a lot of reality there. And also when you think about a lot of production demands that plants have with ventilation systems and that, if we don't get it right, there's going to be a lot of product that isn't right. And
Mhm.
so it's important that each and every time we're thinking about how to get things right, but also taking risks for our clients, calculated risks, if you will, on how we can get them the best plant at the most effective price. Because right nowadays, price, time, money, that all is important to clients. And so we're charged with trying to get them a cost-effective way to get the product and the process they need.
Yeah. Greg, I'm going to transition here a little bit. So I mentioned our speaker who was on one of our videos from John Deere, and she talked, you think about, well, I started in at Oscar Mayer and now I'm at Hunt Mead. And so it just kind of looks like this linear transition. Do you want to talk about like, what does a career look like in your particular case, your all your different jobs and things you've done?
Sure. So I made up this little chart because I knew you were going to ask that question, John. And what's interesting about this chart is it shows my progression through the years. So I started out as an engineering trainee, went to maintenance planner, kind of moved up, and you can see the different jobs. You also notice here that I jumped up into this manager area. So on the left-hand side, I should just explain individual contributor. It means you can do your work on your own and do your project individually. Manager means that you work through others, and then executive means that you're working through your managers. And so you can see that my career wasn't necessarily linear, just moving straight up, but rather back and forth and weaving. And the important part about this is that while I did go up and down and back and forth, it's what I learned in each job.
Mm.
And how does all those learnings on the experiences that I got on the right hand side really add up to getting me ready? And so, an example that I have is that as I came in to try to lead the Mead and Hunt organization in the food business, I got a lot of different leadership experiences. And one of them that I took was being a volunteer on 3A. 3A is a sanitary design organization. It's a nonprofit and it supports the industry. And so I got to work with people around the industry on that job, leading that organization for a few years. That experience gave me the contacts and the experience working with a broader industry to really get me ready to work at Mead and Hunt, where I work outside of my company with a whole bunch of other companies like Schwann's and Conagra and Kraft. And so all those experiences and taking on those challenges, when they add to your resume, if you will, it just helps get you ready for that next job because you don't know what that next job will be and what you're really preparing for. You should probably say, hey, maybe when I retire, I'd like to be vice president of engineering and think about that. That helps you identify the jobs that you want to get along the way and the experiences that you'll need to be that vice president. Make sense?
The 3A work, was that a development of standards in part, or?
It is. 3A, we develop standards for the dairy and other comestibles, as they call it, so other food businesses, but mostly used in the dairy industry.
Yeah, just a quick lesson. We've got students here who are, involved with ASABE and other
Mhm.
professional engineering organizations, and in most years are traveling to national conferences and things. And you see these meetings where they're going to spend, 2.5 hours talking about ASABE standard 279.14, which is one that I've happened to be involved with. And as an engineer, you think, oh my goodness, that is so boring. And we talk about consensus standards in our classes. But the really crucial thing, and I think what you talked about, is that life lesson of like meeting people. Like I've met people from every major farm machinery manufacturing company in the world because of my involvement in standards development. So never look badly at those kinds of opportunities.
I do agree. And the interesting thing about 3A is that they have a section of the group that are the regulators that come in and participate on it. And so that helps out a lot when you have a regulatory issue and you work for Kraft. You've got a guy that you know from 3A that you can call and talk to him about, hey, we've got this problem. How can we work through this in a proper regulatory manner? And so it really broadened out my opportunity to help both my company and my career by taking on that volunteer experience. It was a lot of work in addition to my day job, but certainly worthwhile, and it really benefited me as I moved up and had other opportunities.
And also when you work and you are engaged in those kinds of processes, people notice. And if they're looking for an engineer that has a certain expertise that you've demonstrated through your, not only your technical expertise, but also your follow through on stuff, people notice those sorts of skills. I think we might want to would like to talk with you a little bit about your transitions from Oscar Mayer to Kraft Mead. And I know that in the past you've kind of shared some of those details. And I think, again, one of the lessons in this class is that our lives change, our careers change, including some things that are not always expected or not always at the time welcome. And they don't feel good at the time. You want to just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Change is a scary thing, and it's something though that you have to look at and say, hey, what can I make out of this change? So as I mentioned before, I'd spent about 34, 35 years at Oscar Mayer Kraft, had a great career. Um, the Kraft was around and it was a family business since 1883, so about 132 years in 2015. And then all of a sudden, there's this opportunity, this business opportunity to merge Kraft and Heinz together. And it was truly a great opportunity at the time to merge businesses together. But guess what? They didn't need all the engineers and all the folks that they had. And suddenly, my 35-year career ended with a phone call that I got while I was on vacation, just saying, "Hey, when you come back, you won't have a job. Thank you very much for working." And you know what? That could have been devastating. And I will tell you that I took a couple weeks off because I'd never really had a long vacation since I started at Kraft. And I thought a lot and I talked to a lot of folks. But it was really those friendships and those relationships that I had developed both within Kraft Foods and outside of Kraft Foods that really got me through. That's when I got involved in the UW Meat Science and Animal Biologics building, that discovery building that we talked about earlier. And I was able to take the talents that I had and apply them very effectively while I thought about what I wanted to do for a job. And then out of the blue one day, I got a phone call from the president of Mead and Hunt saying, hey, I'd like to do something with my food business. I've been talking in the industry and I heard you're available. And so we got together and we talked for a while. And in about a month, I ended up starting working for them. Now, the really neat part about it is now that I work for Mead and Hunt, and I mentioned some of the companies we work with, a lot of my friends who also got the call on that 2015 day, I'm still working with, because as we've gone off to different companies, we know each other can help us help each other as we go through different things. So I've got another guy that started a consultant agency who comes to me when he needs certain engineering help. And I also work for a lot of companies like Schwann's and Kraft, that because of the folks that I know. So those relationships are important. What I'll tell you is people don't hire companies, they hire people, and it's all based on relationships. And so that relationship that you have is very, very important.
Is it safe to say, I mean, the relationships theme is like loud and clear when I hear you talk. Is it also safe to say they don't hire you? You've got to be solid at your calculus and your physics and your thermodynamics and heat transfer and your fluids and all the technical stuff, but they're hiring a person, right? And when you're looking in the marketplace, those relationships are just so crucial.
Right. No, you're exactly right. And so, yes, a good client of ours has stated it exactly that way, is that we look for companies that have the strengths and all the skills that you need to have. But what we do is we hire people. And so we want to have a relationship with you. If we can't have a relationship with you, I don't care if you're the best physicist in the world or best engineer, it doesn't work for us. And so they say that we hire people that have great skills.
This change you made, if I could just probe a little bit deeper, you said that, you got this phone call when you were on vacation. And I know that in my case, I've had some either phone calls or when I was a senior in college, I had 5 interviews in 1 week. And I was expecting from the five, I was expecting 3 offers. And this was back when Reagan was president. So it was a
Mhm,
long
mhm.
time ago. And there was a big change in it was our federal agricultural policy. And on one day, I got four, they froze everything and they started laying people off. I got 4 ding letters in the US mail in one day. And a fifth one came registered mail. And they basically said, we just have to end our relationship with you. Here's your reimbursement check for having traveled. I went to Minneapolis twice in a week for interviews, and I was just devastated. And my natural tendency would have been to sort of curl up in a ball and just kind of lay in bed for a couple weeks. When these things happen, like in your life, when you've had losses or changes, like how do you keep your spirits up and kind of keep trucking along?
Well, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but there have been a lot of disappointments on a day-to-day basis at work or whatever, that I just go ahead and let myself be maybe a little upset or disappointed for the rest of the day. But the
Mhm.
next day is a new day, and we start over again and we figure it out. And so that's been my attitude through all these things. So similarly, when Kraft called up after 35 years, maybe it took 14 days, but I took that time just to kind of think and ponder, and then I said, "Hey, time to get going." No sense dwelling on what could have been or what has happened in the past, but what are you going to do going forward? So a lot of my engineers, I tell them that, yep, you made a mistake, but what really matters to me is that what you do to take care of the mistake. What do you do to take care of this bad thing that happened? And it has to do with your own life as well as the engineering that you do. If you have a disappointment somewhere, what do you do about it? And that's what people see, is that character that an individual has, on whether they want to work with them more or give them more projects that are challenging.
Yeah. And I just want our students to know, Greg, when you're 20 or 21, and I remember even until I got to be in my 30s thinking I had never really experienced big time loss, whether it was a death in of a family, the loss of a
Mhm.
job, not getting the perfect job that I thought I was perfectly well suited for. But those losses will happen in your
Yep.
life. And
Absolutely.
it's really about how you are able to pick yourself up and move forward. And I really do believe a big part of that is the people that you surround yourself with, your friends, your family, that you maintain those relationships, because you'll need those people down the road, whether or not you realize that today. So let's kind of transition back out. Now you're at Mead and Hunt, obviously. Could you just talk a little bit about some of the differences between, like when you're with Kraft and Oscar Mayer, like a plant engineer, a corporate engineer versus a consultant? Like how do those vary, those jobs?
Sure, sure. So if you will, I could kind of break down different kinds of engineering jobs in some big buckets. One, like a plant engineer, that's kind of the day-to-day hands-on application of engineering concepts. What's really important for a plant engineer is that you take care of today's problem today. The plant is expecting to keep on running. When you get to be maybe move into corporate engineering or a project engineer, you're doing more of the strategic and the planful application of engineering applications. And so you have a little bit more time to think about it, plan it, look at it from different angles. What about short-term impacts, longer-term impacts? But
That
as
where-
you move on,
Is that where some of the vision, the importance of like being able to develop and think through a vision? Is that?
oh, absolutely. A lot of, if you will, vision or strategic plan, thinking through those bigger concepts and, what are the, what could we be in the future rather than how do we keep ourselves running and just making the product or whatever we have to do. When it comes to being a consultant, it's really that technical application of engineering theory and concepts, if you will. It's knowing your technical stuff very, very well and being able to apply it because that's what folks are hiring consultants for. And then as you move on and being an engineer, maybe in a state or a federal role, it's really that application of engineering principles through codes and regulations, right? It's about maybe looking at things and saying, here's some codes and regulations, guidelines that we want to make sure everybody follows. And so as I think about it, that's kind of the different areas of engineering and the different kind of the skills required and the opportunities, if you will. A lot of folks have different interests, and some people are maybe bigger picture, some are maybe on the fly type thinkers that may drive you to one job or another.
And you may also start out in a job where you think this is exactly what I want to do, and you find out like, no, I don't really want to do consulting work for whatever reason. If it's a
Mhm.
small company, it may not have the stability or as much work as what's needed to keep you fully occupied and busy and paid. So be willing to, be willing to take risks and learn, and again, following through on the relationships. Let's kind of transition out of here. Could you just talk about a person or two who have made a really big difference in your life? Maybe who's inspired you the most or had a biggest impact?
Well, I mentioned Bob Owen a few minutes ago, and he certainly had a big impact on my life. But as I think about it, and if I had to pick one person, I'd really think about my dad.
Mhm.
My dad grew up in a small town in central Illinois. He was the first one in his family to go beyond, if you will, the local school and went on to business school. He did become an insurance salesman, and he did a great job on that. But I really believe he wanted to be an engineer. Um, he was always designing and building things around the house, which really gave me a lot of my basic understanding and skills as far as being an engineer and thinking things through and trying to design them out. He did just an incredible number of things and really got me inspired to become an engineer. So I think I'd probably pick my dad.
Mhm. How about inspirational quotes we all see on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, or on the highway, these big billboards with inspirational quotes? Do you have any inspirational quotes or final like parting words of wisdom for people?
Well, just the one that I use is just make sure you never do less than your best. And it was said by Walt Disney. But for me, that's been important throughout my whole career. Just for how the reason that I've moved up in the world is that I've always tried to do my best. As I talked to my children about the work that they did in their school, and they brought me their homework, and I said, "Well, did you do your best on it?" A lot of times they'd say, "Well, maybe not." I said, "Well, then maybe you want to do it again." And I wouldn't even read their paper or whatever until I felt like they felt they had done their best. And so putting your best foot forward is always the right thing to do whenever you're in a business or personal situation. So that's why I picked that one.
Yeah.
And here's some pictures of something I like doing at Science Olympiad. I run the test stand for bridges and towers. And here a student on the right is got a tower that he built. But if you would have seen his first tower, it wasn't so great. We broke it right away. Over time, these students really get good at building towers. And my opportunity here is to help them test their tower, but also talk to them about, how they could do better next time.
Mhm.
And, what are the physics behind this that caused that structure to be unstable or whatever. And it's just amazing what the students do with a little bit of input and help. So,
And
so I love helping them with that.
their first towers probably collapsed,
Oh,
repeat,
absolutely.
and they learn.
Some before you even load it up, believe it or not, they're just kind of flimsy. They think they could make it light, but this particular tower only weighs about 5 grams, but it's going to hold 15 kilograms
Yeah.
at the end. And so think about that as weight held to the weight of the mass ratio, and it's quite incredible.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, we're going to just keep recording here. If you wouldn't mind just stopping sharing your screen, I just want to, as I get ready to kind of wish you farewell and thank you. I think it'd be good to see both of us side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Do that. Actually, go to the bottom and turn off
Yeah.
your share screen.
Yeah, I'm just getting there, but I have just too many things. I am sorry.
No, that's okay. It's within the Zoom window.
There.
There
How's that? There
No,
we
I
go.
thought it was because I think otherwise people just see us one little block at a time.
Okay.
But Greg, I just wanted to say thank you for your time. I think lots of life lessons, even talking about collapsing bridges. I think we have these moments in our life where things do collapse. The ideas we learn, we take risks, we move forward, we have relationships. And I really do appreciate my relationship with you and the fact that you're willing to come back and share your life experiences and your stories with students. So thank you for being part of our class.
Well, thanks for having me here. It was a great discussion, and good luck to all the students as they take their next steps in their careers.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye now.